It was a crisp spring evening in 1962, and the lights of the Riviera Ballroom shimmered like a constellation brought down to earth. The audience buzzed with anticipation. It wasn't just another night. This was Dean Martin's return after a series of personal struggles that had tested even the most confident of men. For weeks, whispers had floated through Hollywood circles, rumors of trouble, debts owed, and dangerous men lurking behind the glamour. Dean, however, always carried himself with a calmness that belied the chaos that seemed to follow him. Tonight, he was ready to remind the world who he was. Backstage, the air smelled faintly of cigar smoke and spilled whiskey. Assistants rushed around, adjusting microphones, placing sheet music, and giving last-minute instructions. Dean Martin, dressed in a tailored midnight blue tuxedo, leaned against a polished oak wall, a glass of water in one hand, and his ever-present smile on his face. He exuded ease, but inside, a knot of tension twisted in his stomach. "You ready for this, Dean?" whispered his longtime pianist, Louis. "They're packed out there. You're gonna bring the house down." Dean chuckled softly, swirling the water in his glass. "Louis, I've been ready my whole life. If anyone wants to test me tonight, well, they'll see." No one could have predicted what awaited him on stage. The show began flawlessly. The band struck the first chords, and Dean glided onto the stage with the effortless charm that had made him a household name. Applause roared like a tidal wave, carrying him through the opening numbers. Every note, every gesture, every playful wink was met with laughter and cheers. For a moment, the world outside the Riviera Ballroom seemed to disappear. Dean was untouchable on island of charisma in a sea of adoration. But then, midway through his third song, a ripple of tension sliced through the crowd. A man in a dark suit, his face shadowed by the brim of a fedora, appeared at the edge of the stage. Security immediately tensed, but the man moved with an unusual calm, as if he belonged there. He raised a hand and spoke in a voice that carried both authority and menace. "Dean Martin," he called out, loud enough for every corner of the ballroom to hear. "The Don wants a word. And you'd better listen carefully." The audience froze. A few whispers became a wave of uneasy murmurs. Lights flickered, as if the universe itself held its breath. Dean's smile didn't falter, but behind the glint in his eyes was steel. He recognized the tone immediately, the type of man who did not take no for an answer. The man stepped closer, sliding through the crowd as if he were the only person in the room. "You've crossed lines, Dean. Money owed, favors ignored. Tonight, it ends." Dean Martin straightened. He was on stage, in front of hundreds, yet he did not flinch. Instead, he did something that stunned everyone. He smiled wider, and with a voice smooth as velvet but cold as steel, he responded. "Sir," Dean said, pausing deliberately, "you must have mistaken me for someone who's scared." A hush fell over the room. The man's jaw tightened. "This isn't a joke." "The Don doesn't like jokes." Dean's smile never wavered. "Then I suggest you tell him I'm not in the business of fear. I'm in the business of entertainment. And if he wants a show, he's welcome to sit down and watch. But if he's here to threaten me," he let the words hang, letting the silence speak for him. The tension was electric. Louis and the other band members froze, unsure of how Dean had the courage to confront a man who could easily ruin lives with a snap of his fingers. The audience, oblivious to the danger, assumed this was part of the act-a-daring bit of improv. Only a few sharp-eyed men in the crowd sensed the gravity of the moment. Then, the unexpected happened. The man in the fedora leaned closer and whispered something Dean could barely hear. The words were thinly veiled threats, laced with promises of consequences that could ruin careers, families, and reputations. Dean tilted his head, considering his options. Most men would have fled. Most would have bowed. Most would have crumbled. But not Dean. He took a slow step forward, putting himself fully in the man's space, and spoke in a voice so calm It made the blood run colder. "Listen to me," Dean said. "Life is full of threats. Some we can avoid, most we can't. But the ones that truly matter are the ones we face with courage, with humor, and with grace. Tonight, you threaten me in front of hundreds. But all you've done is give me a story and a reason to sing louder, laugh harder, and shine brighter. So go ahead, make your move. But no, this sigh will not bow. I will not run. And I will not let fear write my story." A silence so deep it felt like the world had stopped followed. The man in the fedora stared, caught off guard by Dean's audacity. Every instinct told him that this was a different kind of man, one who could not be intimidated. Slowly, he backed away, disappearing into the shadows of the ballroom, leaving behind a whisper of menace and a lesson in resilience. The audience erupted in applause, assuming Dean's confrontation had been part of the act. Dean smiled, raised a hand in mock bow, and continued singing as if nothing had happened. But behind the confident exterior was a quiet triumph of validation that courage, wit, and presence of mind could outshine even the darkest threats. Backstage later, Louis shook his head in disbelief. "Dean, I've never seen anything like that. That man, he could have." Dean waved him off, lighting a cigarette with a casual grace. "Louis, everyone has their battles. Some are in the spotlight, some behind the scenes. The trick is to meet them with calm, with clarity, and never, ever let them define you." That night, Dean Martin didn't just entertain. He taught a lesson. The lesson wasn't about fearlessness, born of ignorance, but about the strength found in self-belief, presence of mind, and the courage to face darkness with a smile. And somewhere in the shadows, the Mafia Don reconsidered his next move. Learning that some men's spirits could not be broken, not with threats, intimidation, or even fear. This sets up the story's motivational core: resilience, courage, and wit in the face of danger. Part 2 will dive deeper into the aftermath, escalating tension, and how Dean's life intertwines with the underworld threat, building suspense and drama even further. The night after the Riviera ballroom confrontation, Los Angeles felt smaller and more dangerous than ever. Dean Martin's triumph on stage had earned him thunderous applause. But it had also sent ripples through a hidden world, the one that thrived in shadows, where power and fear were currency. Back in his penthouse, Dean sat in silence, the city lights painting streaks of gold and silver across the floor-to-ceiling windows. He wasn't a man who feared ghosts, but tonight, the echoes of that fedora-clad man lingered like a warning. Every whisper of the wind outside seemed to carry the message: he's watching. Louis, his pianist and closest confidant, paced the room, muttering under his breath. "Dean, you really put yourself in the lion's den tonight. That man, he isn't bluffing. You can't just face someone like that and walk away." Dean exhaled slowly, the faint curl of smoke from his cigarette rising like a ghost in the lamplight. "Louis, I didn't walk away. I stood my ground. That's what matters. Fear is easy to give power to, but courage has to be claimed." Louis shook his head, worry etched deep across his face. "Claimed, sure, but some men don't let go." Some men," Dean interrupted, "don't know who they're dealing with." That night, sleep eluded him. Shadows seemed to move in corners, and every sound: a car engine, a distant shout, a phone ringing, felt like a threat. By morning, Dean realized something chilling. This confrontation wasn't over. It was only beginning. The letter 2 days later, a plain envelope arrived at Dean's hotel suite. No stamp, no return address, only his name scrawled in jagged handwriting. He tore it open, revealing a single sheet of paper. "You amused us at the ballroom. But amusement has a price. The dawn does not forget, and the dawn does not forgive. Your next performance, it will decide more than applause." Louis read the note over Dean's shoulder, his hands trembling. This isn't just a warning, it's a challenge. And challenges like this, they're dangerous. Dean folded the note with deliberate care. Danger is part of life, Louis. Some men fight with guns. I fight with wit, charm, and strategy. And if the Don wants a lesson, I'll teach him one he won't forget. A plan in motion. Dean's team sprang into action. Security increased. Routes to every performance were scrutinized, and trusted friends shadowed him wherever he went. But Dean knew that preparation wasn't enough. To face someone like the Mafia Don, he needed something more: intelligence, patience, and the ability to read people the way a composer reads notes on a page. He called in a former FBI agent, Frank Bellini, who had left the bureau years earlier, but remained a master at understanding organized crime. Bellini studied the threats, the letter, and the whispers in the underworld. Finally, he nodded. "This isn't a man you negotiate with," Bellini said. "This is a chess game, Dean. One false move, and it's not just your career, it's your life." Dean lit a cigar and smiled wryly. "Then it's a game I'm going to win." Bellini leaned closer. "Winning doesn't mean brute force. It means anticipating the Don's moves, predicting his fears, and striking where he least expects it. You need to turn his world upside down while keeping your own intact." Dean's eyes gleamed with the quiet intensity of a man who had stared down the impossible before. "I've got an idea, but it's risky, it's dangerous. And it's going to require the bravest thing I've ever done. Being myself, unflinching, unshakable, untouchable." The next performance, a week later, Dean returned to the stage, but this time, the stakes were higher than ever. The theater was grander, the crowd larger, and the tension in the air almost suffocating. Rumors had leaked about the previous confrontation, and while the audience thought it was drama, the reality was far more perilous. Dean began his set with effortless charm. Every note a defiance, every gesture a proclamation. But halfway through, something unusual happened. The lights dimmed suddenly, and a hush fell over the crowd, a signal that someone powerful was making their presence known. From the balcony, the silhouette of a man emerged, the Mafia Don himself, larger than life, radiating menace. Security tensed, but Dean didn't flinch. Instead, he stepped forward, microphone in hand, and addressed the room, not the Don, but the crowd, as if to mask the danger with performance. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, voice rich and smooth, "tonight we have a very special guest." His smile never faltered. "Some people show up expecting fear. I prefer applause. And applause, my friends, is far more powerful than fear." The Don's eyes narrowed. He wasn't used to being addressed this way. Usually, fear bowed before him. But here, in this moment, Dean's calm audacity was a weapon sharper than any gun. Then, as if choreographed, Dean launched into a song, not just any song, but one layered with coded messages, references to loyalty, honor, and the consequences of intimidation. The crowd cheered, oblivious, but the Don understood every word. Each verse was a subtle warning, each note a test of courage. And with every line, Dean's gaze locked onto the Don's, unblinking, unafraid. By the end of the song, something extraordinary happened. The Don leaned back, almost imperceptibly, a flicker of doubt crossing his face. For the first time in years, he realized that this man, the crooner, the entertainer, was untouchable in a way he hadn't anticipated. The lesson backstage, after the performance, Dean and Louis exhaled in relief, but the tension lingered. Bellini arrived, nodding approvingly. "You did it," he said. "You turned a threat into a performance. You made him question his own power. That's rare, Dean. Most men crumble. Most men hide. Not you." Dean smiled, lighting another cigar. "It's not about being fearless. It's about controlling fear, about taking the stage no matter what's waiting in the wings. The Don may have power in shadows, but I have power in light. And that light is stronger than any shadow." Louis shook his head, awestruck. "Dean, the Don. He's not done. This is just the beginning." Dean's eyes sparkled with a dangerous clarity. Let him come. Because the more he tests me, the stronger I get. And when the world watches, they'll see what courage looks like, not in hiding, but in standing tall, even when the world wants you on your knees. That night, Dean Martin didn't just survive a confrontation. He redefined it, turning intimidation into opportunity, threat into spectacle, and fear into triumph. And somewhere in the dark corners of Los Angeles, the Mafia Don began to understand something he hadn't in decades. Dean Martin was a man who could not be broken, not by fear, threats, or even power itself. The days following the Riviera Ballroom performance became a study in tension and anticipation. Los Angeles shimmered in sunlight, its streets alive with gossip, but underneath the glitter, a silent war had begun. Dean Martin had proven himself on stage, but the Mafia Don did not forget Isley, nor did he forgive. Back in his penthouse, Dean studied the city through the expansive windows, cigarette smoke curling like question marks in the morning air. His life, which once revolved around music, laughter, and the applause of thousands, had been transformed into a game of shadows. Every knock on the door, every phone call, every stranger in the hallway became a potential threat. Yet Dean carried on, blending charm and strategy like he blended a perfect cocktail, smooth, intoxicating, and with an edge sharp enough to cut through danger. Louis, who had practically moved in with him, frowned from across the room. Dean, this is no ordinary mob problem. He's escalating. It's not just threatening your career, he's testing your life. You can't play the showman and the target at the same time forever. Dean smiled faintly, eyes narrowed in calculation. Louis, you don't get it. That's exactly what makes this interesting. The Don thinks he can intimidate me, but he doesn't know I'm playing a different game, one where he's always a step behind. The first move. It started with small things, cryptic messages left at restaurants, strangers loitering near Dean's favorite hangouts, mysterious calls that ended with silence. Each act was designed to unnerve him, to make him question the safety of every step. But Dean didn't falter. Instead, he meticulously studied patterns, mapping out the Don's movements, associates, and likely targets. One evening, Louis noticed a pattern. Dean, every time you perform, he's watching, right? Then why does it feel like he's one step ahead? It's almost like he knows what you're thinking before you do. Dean leaned back, lighting a cigar. Exactly, Louis. That's why I have to think 3 moves ahead. He's playing chess. But I'm playing 3-dimensional chess. With Bellini's help, Dean began setting traps, not physical traps, but psychological ones. He leaked false schedules, staged rehearsals, and used decoys. Each act was carefully calculated to confuse the Don's network, making it impossible for him to predict Dean's next move. The ambush. One rainy night, a tip came in. A small club in downtown Los Angeles, a private performance, an exclusive gathering for some high-profile guests. Dean accepted, knowing it might be a trap, but also knowing it could be an opportunity to strike back. The club was dimly lit, the rain tapping against the windows like a persistent heartbeat. Dean took the stage, microphone in hand, as the audience's chatter faded into silence. He began singing, his voice a blend of warmth and steel, carrying notes that could calm or command attention. From the shadows, a figure watched a man who carried the aura of menace, flanked by silent enforcers. The Don was there, testing, observing, waiting for the perfect moment. Halfway through the set, the lights flickered and went out, plunging the room into darkness. Panic surged in the crowd, but Dean's voice cut through, steady, commanding. Ladies and gentlemen, sometimes the darkness is where we find our true strength. Then, in an instant, a spotlight illuminated a single corner of the stage. The Don emerged from the shadows, flanked by his men. The audience gasped, thinking it was part of the act, but Dean knew better. "You're bold," the Don said, voice sharp, resonant with danger. "But boldness doesn't last forever." Dean took a slow step forward, his gaze unwavering. Boldness lasts as long as courage does. And courage never dies in those who know how to use it. The Don's men moved, subtle gestures signaling an attack, but Dean had anticipated this. With a fluid motion, he triggered a pre-planned distraction, lights blaring, smoke machines erupting, waiters spilling champagne in precise chaos. The Don's men faltered, caught off guard, giving Dean just enough time to retreat to the safety of a secret exit. The silent strategy backstage. Dean leaned against a wall, heart racing not from fear, but from exhilaration. Louis and Bellini joined him, both pale but impressed. "Dean, that was insane," Louis said. "You could have been dead." Dean finished for him, a faint smirk on his lips. "Yes, Louis. But that's why we never improvise recklessly. Every move I make has a purpose." Tonight, the Don learned something very important. I'm not just a performer. I'm a strategist. I don't run from threats. Control the stage, even when it's not just music I'm conducting. Bellini nodded, impressed. "He's underestimated you, and that's a mistake he won't repeat. Unless you make another mistake, you're walking a knife's edge." Dean exhaled slowly. "I've always walked on edges, Bellini. I've always done it with a smile. That's the trick. Fear is contagious, but confidence spreads faster." The turning point the next week brought a message that changed everything. A cryptic note, delivered by a man with no face visible under his hood. "You are clever, too clever. The Don wants a meeting. No games, no performances. You alone." For the first time, Dean Martin felt a tension, unlike before, not fear, but the weight of true stakes. This was no longer about a show, an audience, or applause. This was personal. Louis stared, horrified. "Dean, this is insane. You can't go alone. It's suicide." Dean smiled faintly, his calm exterior hiding a storm of calculation. "Louis, courage isn't the absence of danger. It's the presence of preparation. I go alone, K, but I don't go unarmed. Not with weapons, not with guns, K, but with the one thing he can't anticipate, my mind." In the days that followed, Dean meticulously prepared. Every detail of the meeting was imagined, rehearsed, and predicted. He studied the Don's habits, his psychology, his tendencies. And with each step, he built a plan so audacious, so brilliant, that it could either end him or turn the Don's own power against him. The calm before the storm. On the night of the meeting, Dean Martin entered a private mansion in the outskirts of the city. The Don waited, imposing, as expected. The room was dim, the air heavy with unspoken threats. Dean stepped forward, calm, poised, and unafraid. "You asked for a meeting," he said, voice smooth. "Here I am. What is it you want, really? Power? Respect? Or do you simply want to see if I'll crumble like every other man before me?" The Don studied him, eyes narrowing, the tension crackling like a live wire. For the first time, Dean could see doubt flicker a tiny shadow in a man accustomed to absolute control. And that doubt was the first crack in the Don's empire. The mansion was silent, save for the faint hum of a chandelier swinging slightly in the drafty hallway. Dean Martin's footsteps echoed softly, deliberate. Each step a declaration. He was calm, composed, and unafraid. The Don awaited him in a private study, a room lined with dark mahogany shelves and the faint smell of expensive cigars thrown for a man used to absolute control. Dean's hands were empty, his demeanor unthreatening. But beneath the tailored tuxedo, his mind was a weapon, sharper than any steel the Don could wield. He had rehearsed every word, every pause, every subtle inflection, and tonight that preparation would meet fate itself. The Don, imposing in his presence, leaned back in a leather chair, fingers steepled. "Dean Martin," he said, voice low, resonant, commanding. "You amuse me. You survive my men. You even charm my city. But I wonder, Can you survive me? Dean smiled, smooth and steady. The question isn't whether I can survive you. The question is whether you can survive me. A dangerous game. The Don's men stood silently at the edges of the room, ready for violence, but Dean's gaze swept over them with uncanny control. He didn't flinch. He didn't panic. He simply observed, reading the subtle tells of tension and doubt. "You think you're clever," the Don said, rising from his chair. "But cleverness doesn't save you when the world turns against you." Dean tilted his head, voice calm, measured, almost hypnotic. "It's not about being clever. It's about being present, being aware, and using what others underestimate: the power of calm, of wit, and of choosing the right moment." The Don laughed, dark and low. "Words, words. They're meaningless. Power is action." Dean's smile didn't falter. "And yet, some actions speak louder than guns. Tonight, I intend to show you the difference, the subtle trap." The meeting escalated slowly, almost like a dance. The Don tried intimidation, subtle threats, and psychological pressure, but Dean had anticipated everything. Each word he spoke was carefully chosen, planting seeds of doubt and hesitation. Then Dean reached into his jacket pocket not for a weapon, but for a folded piece of paper. He tossed it casually onto the table. "What's this?" the Don demanded, his eyes narrowing. Dean shrugged innocently. "Just some notes, observations. Things I've noticed about you, your organization, your habits. Nothing personal." The Don snatched the paper and read it, his expression slowly changing from annoyance to confusion, and finally to unease. Dean had documented patterns, vulnerabilities, and inconsistencies, proof that even the most powerful men have cracks. You've been watching me?" the Don said, a dangerous edge creeping into his voice. Dean leaned forward slightly, eyes locking on the Don's. "Not watching you, studying you. And in every man, no matter how powerful, there's a weakness. Tonight, you see yours. It's a psychological edge." The room grew tense. The Don's men shifted, sensing the shift in power. Dean didn't raise his voice. He didn't make threats. He simply spoke with clarity and authority, dismantling the Don's aura of invincibility with every word. "You've built a world where fear rules, where loyalty is bought, and where threats carry weight. But what happens when someone faces you without fear? What happens when someone sees every move you make and refuses to bow?" The Don's hands trembled imperceptibly. His voice, once commanding, now wavered slightly. You're dangerous." Dean's smile was almost gentle. "No, I'm just aware. Awareness gives power, courage gives strength, and knowledge gives the advantage." The turning point, the Don attempted a final intimidation, leaning forward, his gaze piercing, a subtle signal to his men, but Dean had orchestrated one last move. Hidden allies, alerted by Bellini, quietly surrounded the mansion, ready to intervene if the Don tried any sudden violence. Dean took a slow step back, his voice calm, resonant, and filled with unwavering confidence. "Your power comes from fear. Take fear away, and all that remains is choice. Tonight, you have a choice. Walk away with dignity, or escalate and risk losing everything." For the first time, the Don paused, not because Dean had weapons, but because he realized his control had slipped. The man who had ruled with intimidation was faced with someone who refused to yield, refused to bow, and refused to be defined by fear. The resolution. The Don exhaled sharply, tension radiating off him. Slowly, deliberately, he leaned back and gestured to his men. "This isn't over," he said, voice low, "but you survived tonight." Dean nodded, unshaken. Survival isn't enough. Thriving in the face of danger. That's the victory. As Dean walked out of the mansion into the cool night, the city lights shimmered like a victory anthem. He had faced a man who embodied fear itself, And he had emerged not only unscathed, but stronger, wiser, and more powerful than ever. The lesson? Back at his penthouse, Dean poured himself a glass of whiskey, the warmth matching the satisfaction in his chest. Louis, Bellini, and a few trusted friends raised their glasses to him. Dean, you didn't just survive. You turned fear into strategy, threat into opportunity, and danger into a lesson, Louis said, awestruck. Dean smiled, lighting a cigar. Life will always throw threats, challenges, and darkness at us. The question isn't whether we can avoid it's whether we face it with courage, clarity, and confidence. Tonight, I didn't just face the dawn. I proved that fear only has power if you let it. Bellini nodded, and the world saw it. That's the real lesson, Dean. Courage isn't silent. Courage is visible, and it inspires. Dean took a long sip of whiskey, gazing out over the city. Somewhere in the shadows, the Don would plan his next move. Dean had already won because he had mastered what no man could take from him: his mind, his courage, and his unbreakable spirit. And that night, as the lights of Los Angeles twinkled like stars, Dean Martin became more than a performer. He became a living lesson in bravery, wit, and resilience, a man who refused to bow, even when the world demanded it. Epilogue: A legacy of courage. The confrontation with the Mafia Don became a quiet legend in Hollywood. Few knew the details, and those who did never spoke openly. But the lesson was clear. True power doesn't come from intimidation. True strength doesn't come from force. It comes from mind, courage, and the refusal to let fear define you. Dean Martin returned to the stage many times after that, each performance more magnetic than the last. Audiences cheered, unaware of the danger he had faced. But Dean carried the memory of that night with pride, not as a scar, but as proof of human resilience. And in every note he sang, in every smile he flashed, he whispered the greatest lesson of all: fear may knock, but courage opens the door.